I hope you enjoyed your meal. If you haven't finished, please continue. There was a board member, Rohan Paul, who organized this event with Chuck Harrington, worked on it very hard. We had to postpone it and reschedule it, unfortunately, also a couple of times because of COVID. And instead of me standing here, Rohan, board member of the World Affairs Council from Deloitte, was supposed to introduce his friend Chuck. Rohan went to a concert on Saturday. You heard there was a concert in Charlotte? A gentleman called Billy Joel. And he had a lot of good friends around him. Rohan is a great guy, has a lot of friends. And one of the friends gave him a little virus. He gave him COVID. So unfortunately, Rohan, who is actually responsible for having this program put together, bringing Chuck and Diana to the World Affairs Council, introducing them to us, having that wonderful dinner last night with us, is not here to introduce Chuck. I'm sure he would do a much better job because they know each other personally and there would be personal touches. I had the privilege of only meeting Diana and Chuck last night. Immediately fell for their charm and just enjoyed getting to know them, but I have to admit, know them very well. So what I'll do, I'll read the biography if you don't mind. You have it on our website, you have it in the announcement if you would want to read more about it. But Chuck Harrington is the recently retired executive chair of Parsons Corporation, and you can find it on the New York Stock Exchange under the three letters PSN if you want to invest into Parsons after listening to Chuck. He served there from 2008 until early 2022 as the CEO and then executive chair of Parsons Corporation. Parsons Corporation is a technology solutions provider driving the future of defense, intelligence, and critical infrastructure markets, with annual revenues exceeding $4 billion US. Chuck was appointed CEO in May 2008, chair of the Parsons Board of Directors later that year, and president in 2009. Before his appointment in 2006, he was appointed to the position of CFO, Chief Financial Officer, and Treasurer of Parsons. Last night we learned that that was his most enjoyable job, the one that he enjoyed the most during his tenure there. Mr. Harrington was the founding president of one of the Parsons operating companies that grew from $5 million US in revenues to over $1 billion US in 4 years, providing technology solutions to the telecommunications and biotechnology markets. Currently, Mr. Harrington serves as the chairman of the Institute of Digital Engineering and is the vice chairman and foundation board member of his undergraduate educational institutions, Cal Poly. He also serves as the board advisor of Glasswing Partners, a cybersecurity venture capital firm, and as an advisor to Holdersworth Group, a private equity spin-off from Tenenbaum Capital. Chuck also sits on the boards of Constellation Energy, J.G. Boswell Company, and JBT Corporation, where he's a member of the Nuclear Oversight Committee. Chuck has also served on the boards of AES Corporation, where he chaired the Finance and Audit Committee, Business Higher Education Forum, California Science Center Foundation Board of Trustees, UCLA Anderson School of Management Board of Advisors, Blumenthal Performing Arts Center Board of Trustees, Los Angeles Chamber of Commerce, Los Angeles Sports Council, Duke University Pratt School of Engineering Board of Visitors, Charlotte Regional Partnership, and he also chaired the Cal Poly SLO President's Council of Advisors. Chuck also proudly serves as the managing director of Harrington Foods, which is his family Wagyu farm. Anyone knows what that is? Wagyu? High quality beef, yes, thank you. Very, very good. So, as I said, we're very fortunate to have the opportunity and and the good fortune to have Diana Chuck with us today, because you can see a very, very busy life. He has been recognized with the WASH 100 Award, New York Building Congress Industry Recognition Award, Charlotte Business Journal Most Admired CEOs, and elected to the National Academy of Construction, and is a member of the Aerospace Industry Association. Chuck holds a BS degree in engineering from Cal Poly San Luis Obispo, MBA in finance and marketing from UCLA, and attended Duke University Advanced Management Program. He holds an honorary doctorate degree in engineering from Cal Poly SLO. So I'm just starstruck of having you here with us here today, Mr. Harrington. And again, once again, would like to, on behalf of the World Affairs Council, thank you and Diana for coming to speak to us. Please give a warm Southern welcome to Mr. Chuck Harrington.
Well, that kind of a background. You know, one thing's for sure, I got a little ADHD. I can't seem to focus on one thing. I tell you, I got out of college and I joined Parsons immediately, and it was the lowest level engineer you could possibly have. And as I look back now, after 40 years, I think of that Grateful Dead song, what a long, strange trip it's been. But since this is the World Affairs Council, I also thought I ought to go look at my bona fides and see just how much traveling I've done. And like many of you here, I guess I do get around. In my 40 years at Parsons, I logged 5 million air miles, visiting literally thousands of our offices, government leaders, and clients in all 50 states and 26 countries around the globe. So I guess nowhere near some of you, but I guess I do qualify as a world affairs person. My wife Diane is here. Diane, would you please raise your hand? I got a lot out of Cal Poly, but our marriage was absolutely the top of that experience. We met in college. We were college sweethearts. I started Parsons. We have 3 children, 2 of which are California natives, and 1 is a Charlotte native. And our 3 children now all live in the Charlotte region, along with our 8 grandchildren, our expanding Wagyu herd, horses, sheep, chickens, and quite a menagerie. Combine that with my technology focus, and think back too far for our young students here, but I'm kind of a mix between the Jetsons, which was a great technology cartoon, and Green Acres, for those of you that remember that. A little bit about Parsons. Most of you probably don't know anything about who we were. Our founder, Ralph Parsons, was a leading designer and builder of refineries back in the 20s and 30s. He formed a joint venture, got angry with his joint venture partner, and in 1944 moved back to Pasadena and started from scratch. And built a leading company in the energy markets around the globe. Almost every country you can think of, it's in oil or gas or nuclear, we were a major part of, and infrastructure. And then we were also a publicly traded company. In 1969, we went on the Amex. In 1972, we wanted our young employees to feel like they had a piece of the pie, so we started an employee stock ownership plan. And we started handing out stock to our employees for their retirement plan. In 1972, we went on the New York Stock Exchange. And in 1984, the name that you'll recognize the last name, our partner in Saudi Arabia, a gentleman by the name of Adnan Khashoggi, had a great disagreement with our leaders and decided to do a hostile takeover attempt. And our CEO at the time, a retired 2-star Air Force general named Bill Leonard, got us together and said, we don't have to do this, let's just buy ourselves. So our ESOP got together, worked with our friends at Bank of America, took on a massive loan and did a leveraged buyout and the first and only takeover of a publicly traded company by its own employees. Now we had a mountain of debt. That took a long time to get out of that mountain of debt. When we finally got out in 2019, I said, let's go back and do this again. And we went and did our IPO, and it was quite a ride. So as I mentioned, I joined in '82. And I somehow always found myself questioning authority, respectfully, of course. And that ended up putting me in a lot of very strange fields. I was off to the North Slope of Alaska. I worked on troubled projects in the Middle East. I worked in classified nuclear programs. And I saw this great talent, and so I started moving Parsons into new markets. We talked about telecom and biotechnology. But when I became CEO, I looked at a company whose expertise was in airports and rail and transit systems. We'd sold our energy group to a company out of Australia. And I felt like our market was stagnant or going down, and I felt we had two choices: sell a company or go on the most massive transformation we'd ever could even possibly conceive of. And I guess I'm a reasonably good salesperson, and I convinced our board to back a transformation. So we decided to go from an engineering and construction company, which we still do a fair amount of, to one of the leading suppliers of offensive cybersecurity to the U.S. intelligence community, the leading supplier of missile defense services, including working with hypersonics, a leader in geospatial intelligence, and a leader in enterprise ground systems, or the software that runs the satellites that our military and intelligence community put into space. So if you were to ask me today, what would most people around the world say Parsons is great at? We're great at managing some of the world's largest airports. We're great at advanced rail transit systems, an inventor of positive train control. We are fantastic at intelligent highways that can control themselves, and we're a leader in environmental remediation. But we're also a leader in cyber, in missile defense, in artificial intelligence, and space systems. So it's really a diverse and interesting mix. And for those of you that are investors, it drives our investors crazy. They don't know what we are. Are you a defense company or are you an infrastructure company? You go, we're both. So I'm going to switch gears now. I want to talk a little bit about cyber. I'm going to give you a little bit of history of hacking. I'm going to talk first about the first hack that was ever recorded. And by the way, it wasn't a cyber hack. And it was in 1903. And a gentleman named Marconi was going around Europe, renting auditoriums and showing his new wireless technology with Morse code. And a very smart competitor got in and sent another signal. And so up on the screen in his auditorium were very vile things being said by Mr. Marconi. That was the first hack, the first wireless signal hack in the history of the world. In 1942, the second big breakthrough occurred. See, when we think about hacking, we're often breaking into encrypted messages. So back in World War I and World War II, that's cryptography. And today it's still cryptography. But in those days, it was simple codes, and Allied forces broke the Enigma code, which allowed Allied forces to see what Nazi Germany was saying that they were doing with their offensive operations. In 1983, another big event occurred. A hacker broke in to the Department of Energy's Los Alamos National Laboratory in New Mexico. And from there, they jumped to the Sloan Kettering Cancer Center in New York to hack into those computers. That was the first known time someone had broke into one system to go to another. A hack today will go through sometimes hundreds of different computer systems to hide their tracks before they get to what they ultimately want to hack. In 1988, MIT unleashed the first computer worm. Now, it was not a malicious worm, but nonetheless, it advanced worm technology. In 94, anybody here from Citibank? Good. Citibank was hacked by the Russians. Transferred $10 million. Didn't hear a lot about that, did you? In 2010, the world really changed. And many of you might recall the term Stuxnet. And Stuxnet was the first example of what's called kinetic cyber. Physical damage was inflicted from a cyber attack. And what happened is the Iranian subterranean centrifuges, which allowed them to enrich uranium, were hacked, and these centrifuges were spun to the point where they blew up. In 2012, Saudi Aramco was brought down for months. In 2016, we're going to move to Ukraine. I thought it was timely. The Petya malware was unleashed, which brought down the electrical grid in Ukraine, including all radiation monitoring at Chernobyl nuclear site. In 2017, Ukraine again became to the top of the list when the NotPetya malware was released and brought down their grid for days. Both of those were inflicted by Russians. In 2017, however, there was another victim. Anybody remember who it was? The international shipping magnate Maersk, the largest shipper in the world. If it hadn't been for a very unreliable power system in Nigeria, which was down, as it frequently is, and their whole network off, Maersk would have lost everything. But when when the election came on, they were able to isolate that network and rebuild all of their data out of Nigeria. So they were only down for a few days. Could have been down for months. The list goes on and on. WannaCry, you might have heard of. Solar Winds last year, Revel, Colonial Pipeline. It's not a safe world, and it's getting less so. In fact, when I'm asked, what about warfare? And I said, well, we in our government and many governments are involved in daily warfare and have been for years. A lot of it's cyber, a lot of malicious things going on, but it's also in space. And it's cyber attacks in space, it's dumb satellites hitting smart satellites. There's a war going on, but most of us don't have seen a view of it. So who's involved in all this cyber hacking? Really 4 groups of players. Nation states, Russia, China, Iran, North Korea, the US, the UK, Israel, and many other actors. Terrorist cells, think ISIS and Al-Qaeda. Criminal network, mafia, the Russian criminal organizations, and drug cartels are all active. And hacktivists, people like Anonymous, like Legion of Doom, like the Chaos Computer Club. So that recent SolarWinds attack, which many of you probably heard of, many of you probably have, was really unique. Because SolarWinds was a tool that many people, including Parsons, had used to upload other cybersecurity software in our networks. And hackers broke into SolarWinds, which allowed them to gain access to thousands of companies and hundreds of US federal departments, including the Department of Defense. Fortunately, we had the latest version of SolarWinds, and we weren't impacted. Many companies, including US federal government, were negatively impacted. I don't think we know yet the extent of data that was potentially stolen. Cyber attacks, we used to say, were growing geometrically. Today they're growing exponentially. Every year, a factor of 10. And hacking is conducted for 4 primary reasons. I'm sorry for the tutorial if this is, you guys are above this, but first reason is militaristic. It's focused on espionage, sabotage, and the first wave of an attack. And many people say, well, with the Russians, why didn't they bring down the Ukrainian grid? Why didn't they shut it down? Let's just say the Ukrainians might have had a lot of help. There might have been a lot of backstopping to keep their grid operating, so all of this terrible news was getting out. The second reason attacks are held is to create civic unrest. Fake news, propaganda released through the internet. We see a lot of that, especially around our elections. It's also to create economic disruption, to create doubt in the economy, doubt in public markets. And lastly, just plain greed, monetary gain. So the cyber motivations don't just vary by the organization doing the hacking. They also vary by who they're hacking. So one organization, given who they're hacking, may have any one or all 4 of those motivations. As we think about infrastructure, and I'll get to this in a second, but just a stat I wanted you to know. In the US alone, in 2019, there were 700 hacks on our infrastructure. Some of them, like Colonial Pipeline, and that was 2020, or 2021, actually had big impacts. But those are growing 35% annually. So in 2020, it was well over 1,000. I think when we get to the end of, and really look back on 2021, we'll probably be about 1,400 hacks on our infrastructure system. The takeaway I'd like you to have, if you're connected to the internet, or something's connected to the internet, it can be hacked. There's almost nothing you can do to preclude it. So let's talk about infrastructure, critical infrastructure, since that was the other half of my talk. And I'm going to, at the very end, I hope you can all make it, I'm going to walk through the steps of conducting a hack. So you can actually see what goes on with what's called an advanced persistent threat attack. So what is critical infrastructure? Well, it's energy. It's our grid. It's oil infrastructure like refineries and pumping stations. It's the natural gas pipelines and pumping stations. It's communications, wireless, wireline, and it's the internet. It's healthcare. It's education. It's our water and wastewater systems. It's transportation. So what kind of transport? Well, think of planes, trains, automobiles, and ships, plus airports and air traffic control systems, intelligent highways, rail networks, and all the infrastructure that goes with that, and ports and harbors. It's public safety, it's policing, it's our defense. It's a broad swath of our economy and ultimately our health and safety. So as it relates to critical infrastructure, you might ask yourself, well, why would anybody want to hack this stuff? What's the whole motivation? Well, first, it's really, really cheap to do. So you might ask, why is it cheap? Well, today you can go down to Target and buy incredibly high-powered, low-cost computing. But it's also a lot more stuff to hack. With the Internet of Things and all the devices we have, there's just a larger attack surface and they're not all safe. 3, there's a lot more data to steal or manipulate or lock up and hold for ransom. And lastly, there's an incredible amount of sophisticated hacking tools for sale or rent on the dark web. And what's really interesting when you see these sites, it's a lot like going to Amazon or eBay. They're all listed, they have stars, hackers, oh, these guys are really great, this tool is really efficient, it had great instructions, had a YouTube video, I could understand how to use it, it's cheap. I mean, they rate themselves. It's really incredible. So second, many of the infrastructure owners are not very sophisticated, and they're underfunded, and they don't have the resources or even the knowledge to protect and do things like software patching. And third, when you attack infrastructure, it's high visibility and it's high impact. You can really impact the lives of a lot of people. So we think of some recent examples, Colonial Pipeline, which impacted people here with long gas lines. Many of you may know or may not know of Altamar, Florida, which also was last year. The city of Altamar, Florida's water plant was hacked into, and hackers tried to greatly increase the amount of fluoride into the system to the point it could have made people sick. Fortunately, it was caught. These aren't the only ones, it just happened to be the two I mentioned. I might also ask yourself, well, why is it so easy? I mean, unless you're hackers, most of you are saying, well, I couldn't do it, right? I mean, I certainly couldn't do it. Well, part of it is, when you think about our infrastructure, most of it, the vast majority was built post-World War II. So it was built from the 50s through the 80s. It's getting old. It's not young infrastructure. The older your infrastructure is, generally, the less sophisticated the defenses are, the easier it is to hack. It's also really, really complex. And what do I mean by that? And I imagine many of our high school students who are taking technology classes know there's two types of networks generally in the world. There's IT and there's OT. IT is information technology. It's the hardware, the software, the cabling, the wireless connections that make everything hum. It's what really drives the information and data that is around commerce. It's around our government systems. And to put it in perspective, and this is one of the facts that just always blows me away. We think about how long mankind has been on this planet. 90% of our data has been produced in the last 24 months. That just tells you how much, I mean, that's much of it useless. This might be on TikTok or Instagram, but that's still a lot of data. The average autonomous vehicle, and we all read about Waymo and others, every autonomous vehicle makes a terabit of data per hour. If all of our vehicles on the road were autonomous, and you'll have to go look this up, that'd be an exabyte of data per year. I can't tell you how many bytes that is. That is billions and billions. It's more storage capacity than we actually have in this country today. The other thing I'd like you to think of is there's 7 billion people in the world. 4.7 billion are now online. And there are 26 billion smart devices in use. That is a big attack surface. There's a lot of data being generated. So now let's talk a little bit about OT. What is this operational technology? Well, that's the hardware, software, and cabling that operates manufacturing and infrastructure. It's the things that controls lighting, motors, pumps, valves, substations, all the things that make our life what it is in a modern society. These two types of networks are often interconnected and therefore either directly or indirectly connected to the internet and therefore can be hacked. They're all creating data this whole time. And data, when you think about it, a series of ones and zeros, it can be stolen. That's probably, and that's bad. What's worse is it can be manipulated. Get into a banking system, put a couple more zeros in, or take a couple zeros away. It's pretty easy. That's pretty disruptive, especially if you don't get paper statements anymore and you're wondering just how much information, how much money I have in my bank. Constitutions can be rewritten. Laws can be rewritten. These are the kinds of things. But the other thing can be is locked up and stolen. I know I was trying to close on a real estate property a few years ago out in Davidson County. I couldn't close on the property because their system was locked up in ransomware. Most of us probably even hear about it. It happens all the time. In 2020, in the US alone, it's estimated that $350 million was paid in ransomware, in cryptocurrency. That's tripling annually. It was over $1 billion in 2021. Cybercrime now, from its inception in the world, totals $6 trillion. If cybercrime on an annual basis were a national economy, it ranks third, behind the US, China, then cybercrime. This costs us a lot of money. Companies have to increase pricing. It is inconvenience. It's a massive cost to all of our economies. So let's now switch gears and get into infrastructure hacking. I talked about how it's easy, it's high visibility, the systems are older, they're easy targets. I also said the owners are diverse, and what did I mean by that? Well, infrastructure is owned by not one company or one government entity. The federal government owns a lot of infrastructure. Think of Department of Defense, Department of Energy, NASA, VA, lots and lots of buildings, multiple owners, so that's complex. But there's also hundreds of state agencies. People like State Department of Transportation that owns highways in each state. There's thousands of local governments, utility departments that own infrastructure. And there's even thousands, if not tens of thousands, of private companies that own our internet, our telecom systems, our energy systems, hospitals, private colleges. It's a vast array. So you can start to see there is no one single solution to solve our weaknesses in infrastructure, certainly cyber infrastructure. And every one of these organizations, as I mentioned earlier, has a varying level of leadership, varying levels of budget, varying levels of technical acumen. When I think of cyber and what do you do about it, I think of that old axiom: if you're in the woods with a group and being chased by a bear, you don't have to be the fastest runner. You just don't want to be the slowest runner. Well, if you've got infrastructure, you may not need to be the most protected, but you darn sure don't want to be the least protected, because they can ferret that out very, very quickly. So what does the future hold? Well, infrastructure is going to become even more connected. If you look at what's going on now in Europe, Asia, and the Middle East, and in many cases they're ahead of us, they're putting instrumentation in their bridges and tunnels and highways, and they're measuring for heat and temperature, moisture, corrosion, stresses and strains on the structure, so they can get a database of the health of that structure. They're monitoring all of the electrical systems. Stoplights, which used to be manually reset every 5 years, are now dynamically reset by computers. If it's done by computers, today there might be a human looking at it, where very quickly, with data analytics and artificial intelligence, All of this will be controlled by bots in the not too distant future. If it's controlled by bots, they can be hacked and they can do things, change maintenance schedules, give owners an indication everything's fine when it's actually crumbling. A lot of mischievous can be inflicted. And with the advent of 5G wireless, you no longer have to individually wire up every sensor. It can now be very cheaply connected to the internet with 5G. So all of this technology has shortcomings, but it also brings with it much greater access to the human population. Folks that couldn't afford to go long distances will be able to do so much more cheaply in much more reliable infrastructure with much enhanced services than they ever did in the past. So there's a lot of good that comes from all this. But we have to recognize it's not 100% safe. There are protections that need to be put in place. So what can be done? Well, I mentioned it earlier that 14 and 12 years ago, respectively, we were the subject of what was called an advanced persistent threat attack by the Chinese government. And I got a rather rapid education on what's involved, how it's done, and the impact of that. And we started way before most companies, 10 years ago, developing what's called a zero trust network. I think the best way to think about a zero trust network, I'll explain it a couple of different ways. If you think of a naval ship, and a Navy ship takes a torpedo, it doesn't immediately throw up a white flag and head for port. It continues into battle. It's designed with safety mechanisms. It can lock itself off and continue to conduct its mission in spite of taking a very large attack. That's how a zero trust network. When you think of a large network, think of a series of handshakes that take place. I log in, I establish my credentials, and now I'm giving, in the old days, free access to this email system, this expense reporting system, and maybe this financial system, and this supply chain system, and sales system. That's the way networks, unfortunately, still generally work in most companies and organizations. But in a zero trust network, no handshake is considered safe. Every single time you have a new handshake, you're independently validated. Makes it a lot more cumbersome for employees, but also means you assume day one that there are bad actors in your network, and so you're constantly scanning for them. The tools that companies like us use, we look for what's called anonymous, it's a hard word to say, anonymous packet tracking. We have artificial intelligence constantly monitoring our network and seeing generally where are the flows of data coming and going. Oh, what's going on over there? That data's going the wrong way. It's like looking at a video. Why is everybody running this way and that person's running that? Well, this allows us to pinpoint that we've got probably a bad actor in our system. Now it's to confine them and get them out of our system. So I mentioned earlier, I talked about Stuxnet and an APD. I want to walk you through how a hack works. And we've been watching this for some time. Hackers really effectively and efficiently gain access to a system. They infiltrate often unsuspecting tools to get someone's administration and password. So example, you might go to a website and put in your credentials, everything looks fine, and it didn't go through. You know, I must have, as I say, fat-fingered your password. So you put it in again, you get through. You go, oh, no big deal. You didn't even make mention of it. Well, that's the best ploy. We put up a fake website, looks just like the other one. When you typed your password in, we just stole it. Now we take you back to the live site. You put your password in, you get in. You don't even think twice. You didn't even know you just gave away your password. That's the way very sophisticated hacks take place. Once entry is made, a different group, or once this weakness is found, oftentimes now what happens is that weakness is not typically exploited by the company that made it. That's called a zero-day defect. What they do now is sell it. And they sell it anonymously. You don't even know who's buying it. They exchange cryptocurrency, somebody else buys it, now they break into the system. What do? Well, they start moving around the network. They first look for what is the schedules that everyone has. They start making logs of all your hardware, all your software, looking at where all of your data is stored. They look at your maintenance schedules. They look at your security team schedules. They see what are the working hours. They look in the calendars of your employees and see who's going to be on vacation. When are you going to be on, doing an outage perhaps. They also start recording and taking files of your video logs and your network maintenance logs and storing them. I'll come back to that in a second. They'll also determine how to jam your systems so that they can cut off all cellular connections out, they can cut off all landlines, they can cut off all other feeds. And then when the hacker decides the time is right, and this is probably the most annoying point, it's the hacker that controls the timing. And this could be months or years later. They then take control of the IT and OT network. They take all the current data feeds and video feeds and block them and replace them with recordings that they had taken previously. So it looks like everything's fine. In the meantime, mayhem is taking place. They begin changing the power provided to pumps, open and close valves with the goal of maximum physical damage, and to keep things offline for the maximum period. Nothing, by the way, is looking amiss to anybody. People in the plant aren't seeing it. People who might be monitoring remotely, nothing's wrong. No alarms, no strange video feeds, and there's probably only a skeletal crew present. So the goal of the demonstrations, we've given demonstrations of how this works to customers, including even before the Super Bowl, how you take the lighting down in the stadium. We had nothing to do with that, just mentioned it was one of the things that popped into our mind you could do. This is often done by only a couple of people. This doesn't take a huge resource. This is why infrastructure hacking is so easy. So let me just wrap up. I think of technology as kind of being like water. It's going to seek the path of least resistance. It's never going to stop. You can't stop it. Governments can't stop it. It's just going to keep moving. And data on the internet, anything that you've done on the internet, I'd like you to keep this thought in mind. Neil Armstrong's steps are still very crisp on the moon. That was in 1969, right? Your data on the internet has basically an infinite lifespan. It can be dredged up at any time. And we as citizens, employees, leaders, politicians, students, we're going to continue to advance our technology, but we also have to acknowledge the risk that we're bringing to the world in the network and invest mightily in the cybersecurity to protect it. And you don't invest once, it's a continuous investment, because the better we make our defenses, the better the offenses become. It's like football or basketball. You get a great defense, somebody figures out how to break it. Now you have to improve your defense again. So as you go about your day, your year, and you start thinking about how infrastructure affects your lives, just think of what it would be like to not have power, to not have clean water, to not have your toilet flush when you push the handle, to not have a school to go to not have health care. These are all the infrastructure that we deal with every day. And it's innocuous. Generally, we don't pay any attention to it, but it is absolutely so critical to our lives. So let's keep our voices loud, remind our leaders to not just build new things, but build protection for it. Thank you.
Wow, this is so very interesting. So now we will have our question and answer session. And I encourage you all to, once you put the question forward, please stand up, introduce yourself, and speak in a loud voice so Chuck can hear your question. So go ahead, Mike.
Hi, Mike Mazzola, University of North Carolina, Charlotte. Chuck, great presentation. A little scary at the beginning about if it's connected, it's doomed. It's kind of a message. But you finished with the idea that you could show folks how to protect themselves. And we have a class at University of North Carolina, Charlotte, for our young folks here called ethical hacking. And ethical hacking is not your ransomware tormentor who sends you a birthday card after you pay off, okay? Ethical hacking is something more valuable than that. Could you tell us a little bit about ethical hacking?
Yeah, so in the hacking world, there's often games that are played, and it's called white hat versus black hat. In fact, every year in Las Vegas, there's 2 back-to-back conferences. One called Black Hat, which is actually the safer of the 2. The other one's called DEF CON. And our hackers, in essence, are ethical hackers. They're generally speaking the white hats. And this is what you do to show a corporation or organization where the weaknesses in their network are. You come in, you're hired by a company, hack my system, show me where I'm weak, help me get stronger and better. And that is in a nutshell, the essence of ethical hacking is to help those defend their networks.
Chase Sanders.
Chase Saunders, an attorney. Electric vehicles, everything, all transportation, the transportation, military and domestic, going on to the grid. What's the vulnerability of the transportation system to hacking on a mass scale?
So in 2010, we hosted the first car hacking village at DEF CON. And the winner hacked into a Chrysler automobile, I think, in 22 minutes. And there was about 500 people attempting to hack in, and he that year won the hack. So as you think of autonomous vehicles, and if this really, I'm going to get a little philosophical. The way autonomous vehicles work when everything's autonomous is much more like an ant colony than it is like traditional traffic today. In traditional traffic today, you have a bunch of humans, some distracted, some not, making independent decisions of where they're going, when to speed up, where to slow down. Are they going to let that person in? Are they going to cut them off? You know, that's not the way an ant colony works. If you've looked at it and ever watched ants, whether on National Geographic or in your backyard, they never have collisions. And why is that? Because they're constantly talking to each other with pheromones. These pheromones are working back feet into those combining lines, and by the time that ant gets up to that car, inches or microns have been moved, and now the ant just merges in. That's the way autonomous vehicles are going to work. So for autonomous vehicles to work, they have to constantly be communicating with each other. And since the information has to be transacted so quickly, they aren't really connecting to the internet that much. But we have a software product called iNet. And iNet, what it does is logs into autonomous vehicle systems. And you might think about it from a public safety perspective. Police might want access to that, as an example. There's a lot of rights and things that have to be worked out, but let's say the technology's there. Also, those cars will be interfacing with the infrastructure on their own. They'll be turning lights red, yellow, green, changing tolls. All of that will be worked out between the vehicles and the infrastructure directly with no human involvement. So is it hackable? Yes. Will there be state-of-the-art technology to protect it? Let's hope.
Some of the students have questions, I understand. Stand up, introduce yourself, tell us which school you're from, and speak loudly.
Hello, my name is Blake Stewart. I'm from Olympic High School. And my question is, what advice do you have for high school students who's considering this type of path?
Yeah, well, I think it's an exciting field. On the humorous side, when I bought our first cyber company, there's a couple things I had to throw out. One was dress code, and 2 were working hours. Our cyber people work whenever they want to work. I've never complained. I get at least 40 hours of work, but it might be from 7 p.m. to 4 a.m. They come in with skateboards and blue hair and have a lot of fun. It is intense work, I will tell you that. On the side of the field that we're on, conducting missions, I've also had employees come in and sleep on the floor for 3 continuous weeks because something got hacked into, and we had to rebuild a complete set of tools, and our folks did that, working 24 hours a day. I can tell you the backgrounds of our hackers are incredibly diverse. They're not all computer scientists. They're not all computer engineers. They're not all even engineers. What many of them possess are really exceptional gaming skills. If you're a gamer, you can have a great world in cyber and have a history degree. In fact, history is sometimes very useful as are foreign languages, helping you decipher who's writing what in your computer code. But there's a lot of computer scientists, computer engineers as well, especially when you start getting into infrastructure and electrical systems, computer systems. It's really good to know how the hardware works. So I say it's a very bright future. It's growing very rapidly, and most companies like Parsons probably have at least 1,000 unfilled positions that we just can't fill because we can't find enough people to do the work.
Wow, very interesting. Go ahead. You stand up.
Question. I am myself Rashad from Olympic High School. We actually have a game development pathway that we just started at Olympic, and I am the game development teacher, and these are all of my students. So they are learning programming, coding, and game development. So it's a good thing to hear that feedback, and we thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. We'll go to another student there. One of you decide, the young lady. Go ahead. Speak loudly though, because we can't really hear you here.
Hi, I'm Jaden. I'm with Olympic High School. And are there like any physical devices we're using to like take precautions and not get hacked by other countries and things?
Yeah, so there are special gateways. There are things called digital diodes. And digital diodes are fairly sophisticated pieces of equipment that allow communications to go only one direction. So if you think about the most critical assets we have in this nation, probably our nuclear power plants, everyone is protected by multiple digital diodes, which make hacking them, I never say impossible, because I want to leave that door open a little bit, but practically, for all intents and purposes, impossible. So that's the high-end protection, but there's firewalls and other things you can do. It's all about keeping everything totally up to date. Make sure if your phone or your computer or your iPad says, oh, I've got an update, install it immediately. Those are putting patches in often that have been found to be exploited, and you're just shutting the door before they do.
Okay, we have two questions, so we're going to go with one student, and we're going to go, go ahead.
Hi, my name is Tony Dick, and I work with one of the major banks here in credit risk management, not operational risk, directly dealing with these technology threats you're talking about, but all of us are impacted that way. But my observation is more about the general threat to society when large events happen. The knee-jerk response is to, sometimes it's perceived as overreaction. I don't want to undermine the threats that come out in these events, or that are out there, but at what point in this conversation is the overreaction? We've also seen this in the pandemic, and we've seen it in all kinds of ways. But when you're counseling clients, how do you look at them and say, you're shutting everything down is too much? Or how do you mitigate, their response to the correct level? That's just a general question, and do what you want with it, but it's a concern that I live with every day.
Yeah, well,
Thank you, Tony.
It's interesting because one of the things that I did was highly controversial right after becoming CEO. We were enduring our second attack by the Chinese, and the technology wasn't as great, and our network probably wasn't what it should have been. I actually shut our global network down for 48 hours.
Yeah.
Impacted a lot of customers. We had to apologize, had to fly all over the world and apologize. But once I explained why they got it, and we've never been put in that position again. But I do think we tend to overreact a bit. Most networks today, sophisticated, and banks, by the way, are some of the most protected networks in the world. I think banks and nuclear power companies are probably, and aerospace defense companies are the absolute top tier in the US. And so I don't have the same level of concern for them that I have for a lot. And my bigger concern is with small and mid-sized companies and state and local governments. Smaller state and local governments. I mean, places like Charlotte is very sophisticated. But you can think of a lot of places around that might be critical from maybe it's a connection of a railway hub or something. It's not going to shut our economy down, but it's going to create a great influence, and then human nature takes over. It's one of the ploys. And then, by the way, if you combine an inconvenience with a major social media false information, you do get people whipped up into a frenzy. That's where leadership comes in.
Yeah.
And we need strong state, local, federal leadership to come in and let people know we've got it under control. Is it embarrassing? Yes. Should it have never happened? Yes. Did we make a mistake? Yes. Own it. And then step in and solve it and put the trust back in the network.
We have a student. Thank you. We have a student there. Speak loudly.
My name is Jose from Olympic, and I was wondering, how long does it take to recover from the
Depends on the degree of the hack. And if it's purely a network hack, you know, look at Colonial Pipeline. You know, they were probably down, what, a week, as I recall? About a week. And that's a fairly long time. Most people can react quicker. If it's something like Stuxnet into very sophisticated equipment that's hard to get, like a centrifuge, it basically took the Iranians out of the nuclear business entirely. I mean, so that can have years of impact. The good news is, in this country, in most established countries, you have that very, very high-end critical infrastructure very well protected. But in your own personal life, if you got hacked, it all depends on how much data you have. You don't have much, it's pretty easy. If you have a lot, it can be a lot more problematic.
So this is so very interesting. We're going to extend it by 3 minutes, if you don't mind.
Okay.
A fellow leader of a nonprofit here in Charlotte, John Gallus, has a question. So, John, you're going to end it, so make it a good question.
No pressure here.
Well, you talk about the sophistication of this, yet our government operates with elected representatives who are not very well informed about all of this. How can we educate them or expect them to be educated in a way that gives them a leadership capacity in this regard?
You know, I wish I had a really well thought out and articulate response. I don't, but what I would tell you is I look at elected leaders and their fiduciary duties to their constituents being much like a board of directors. And board of directors, because of legal liability, have all had to up their game in terms of understanding cyber. They take classes with the National Association of Corporate Directors. Like in my case, I brought on the former head of US Cybercom, I brought on the head of the former US Geospatial Agency, and most boards are doing that. Unfortunately, elected officials can't really do that because the populace elects them, but what they can do in their oversight position is require the underlying agencies and entities and departments to bring somebody on like that. And I think that's key. I mean, elected officials, there's not much you can do about their skills and acumen, but they, assuming if the bylaws of the organization recover it, they can require your underlying organization to up their game.
This is wonderful. I'll use this opportunity, first of all, to thank Chuck Harrington. And please stay. We have something for you. I will invite the board chair, Elaine Cooper, to come up and close. But before I do that, I would like to thank all of you being here once again in these times. And I would like to say that my friend, Grazia Walker, is having a birthday. We all want to wish you a very, very stand-up. Thank you. 85 years young and amazing, Grazia. Happy birthday to you. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much, Chuck. What a fantastic presentation, and it's great seeing so many young people come to hear that. It's fascinating. We appreciate you very, very much.
Thank you.
Small token for that. Oh, there we go.
Thank you.
Very, very much. And thank all of you for being here. It's great seeing a face-to-face instead of seeing everybody on that little Zoom screen. And hopefully we'll see you all here at the next one. And please help us promote global understanding by becoming a member of the World Affairs Council and supporting international education. If you're interested, I think all of us are of the family, but if any of you want any information, just contact us and we'll get it to you. Thank you so much, and we'll see you at the very next event.
Thank you.